Thank you, Zipporah, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to present UNESCO's plan for education for sustainable development for 2030 agenda, which is called ESD for 2030. Next slide, please. So today I will share with you this outline of this ESD for 2030 framework and its road for implementation, which was launched last year for the period of until 2030. Next slide, please. These efforts, of course, builds on the long tradition of education for sustainable development, starting from the Agenda 21 in Rio Summit in 1992. We've been going through the UN Decade on ESD between 2005 to 2014, and then to the Global Action Program period until 2019. Of course, during the gap period in particular, we've seen amazing amount of achievements, including the activities around the forest. But this also, we have to note that it's not enough to reach our goals, and there's still a lot of things to do. For example, in a recent UNESCO study, which was launched at the Berlin conference in May 2021, called Learn for Our Planet, this publication showed that the overall rate of integration of environmental themes in national education policies and education policy-related documents showed that only 19% of them had mentioned biodiversity. So to safeguard our biodiversity and ensure that forest education is a core part of education activities in countries, there's still a long way to go. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, UNESCO now has launched this new global framework called ESD for 2030 towards achieving the SDGs. This framework starts from 2020 to 2030, and over the next 10 years or so, the overall goal of this framework is to build a more just and sustainable world by harnessing and promoting ESD, especially its role as the key enabler of the achievement for all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So you can find the relevant links for this document and also for the roadmap in the chat, as well as on the screen here for your further reference. Next slide, please. In particular, today I would like to highlight the three key features of this new global framework. First of all, it has a particular emphasis on education's role for the successful achievement of the 17 SDGs. So far, all the efforts done in ESD, including forest education, raises the awareness on the 17 goals, whether or not it refers to SDGs directly or not. But on top of that, we would like to further promote the role of ESD to mobilize actions towards the achievement of the SDGs, and also promote the role of ESD to critically and contextualize, critically review the SDGs and in a contextualized manner. In particular, we see that there are sometimes issues and tensions between SDG goals, and ESD provides that learning space for the learners to review and have a critical eye on the tensions and issues that relate to various SDG goals. So these three aspects will be the important aspect of this emphasis on education's role, in particular ESD's role as the key enabler of all 17 SDGs. Next slide, please. The second key feature of this global framework is the focus on the big transformation. First of all, it emphasizes how individual transformation is key in promoting the societal transformation. So it looks at how individual transformation takes place, how transformative action takes place, especially as individuals are recognized as citizens. So ESD in action is citizenship in action. So as citizens, active citizens, individuals can play a big role in promoting and enabling societal transformation to sustainable development. But this individual focus is not enough. We must also look at the structural changes and address them in the content and also in the teachings of our education systems. For example, how our economic models and our values are designed and promoted within education systems would be something for us to look into in order to make sure that we promote the right type of values, the right type of economic systems and models and societal systems that promote sustainable development. Thirdly, the emphasis on technological futures and the advancement of technologies, for example, development of artificial intelligence. What does that mean for sustainable development, and how can that be promoted so that sustainable development becomes the core underlying values shared among those who develop the technology, but also who take decisions to make sure that these technologies are in line with our society's goals. So these three aspects, individual transformative action, structural changes, and technological futures, are the part of the key features of this new global framework. Next slide, please. And the third key feature is the emphasis on member states' leadership to make sure that member states go on the driver's seat to engage all concerned stakeholders in their countries to promote ESD and mainstream it as part of their core education systems. This is in line with UNESCO's call for promoting ESD as core curriculum component by 2025. Next slide, please. And in particular, these activities will be designed around these 5 priority action areas, namely on policy, transforming learning environment, building capacities of educators, empowering young people, and promoting local level actions. These 5 priority action areas remain the same from the Global Action Program period, because many of our stakeholders during the consultation for this new framework have mentioned the importance of continued efforts around these 5 areas. Next slide, please. And in order to approach and take action around these 5 areas, there are 6 implementation strategies identified in the roadmap for ESD for 2030. First aspect is implementation of ESD for 2030 at country level. I would be able to explain this further in our next slides, but country level action is crucial in making ESD as a core element of our education systems. And this is in line with the emphasis on member states' leadership for ESD. Second strategy is harnessing partnership and collaboration, in particular through inclusive global network of partners called ESD-Net that we will soon be launching, together with regular platforms and collaboration opportunities organized around global events. Thirdly, communicating for action would be important, in particular, the continued recognition of good practices through UNESCO Japan Prize on ESD, which from this year onwards will be awarded every 2 years. Also, there are strategies for making sure that we track issues and trends, the latest discussions on ESD on the research side, and translate it into practice, as well as mobilizing resources and monitoring the progress. Next slide, please. So around these discussions on the new framework, UNESCO recently organized UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, postponed from 2020 to May 2021 as an online event live streamed from Berlin, Germany. Next slide, please. And under this flagship World Conference, the discussions took place among the participants, 2,800 invited participants from 161 countries, as well as over 10,000 people who followed the discussions on YouTube live on the day, to mobilize support for the implementation of this new ESD for 2030 roadmap, and also to promote ESD as the key enabler of the SDGs. Next slide, please. And some of the key conference outcomes include the Berlin Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development. This declaration recognizes that ESD should be a foundational element of our education systems at all levels, with environment and climate action as core curriculum component. So UNESCO Director General, Madame Ozri Azoulay, has announced at the conference that UNESCO will work with the member states to make sure that 100% of 193 member states of UNESCO mainstream and take on board environmental and climate action as core curriculum component by year 2025. So with this ambitious goal, this Berlin Declaration captures the visions of our ESD community for the next 10 years. Next, please. And around this Berlin Declaration adoption, strong political commitments were made by individual member states as well. So more than 80 ministers and vice ministers of education made commitments on their country's plan to implement ESD for 2030, which is a strong sign that this ambitious goal can be achieved within the time frame committed. So the time to learn and act for our planet is now. So with this strong message, the conference made these commitments, and hopefully through this Berlin Declaration and the follow-up activities in the events that are coming up, for example, the COP26 in Glasgow on climate change, we hope that this political commitment can be picked up by many countries across the world, as well as civil society, academia, and youth and private sector. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps concretely to make this into a reality? UNESCO has now embarked on the project to discuss with individual countries to prepare them and help them design their own country initiative on ESD for 2030. And there will be regional meetings taking place in 2022. And also a global ESD net meeting is planned in 2023 in the cycle of every 2 years. So in 2025, a midterm review, and 2030, the final review of ESD for 2030. Next slide, please. In particular, country initiative on ESD for 2030 is the core pillar of the implementation of this new framework, because now we are inviting the countries to implement their own country efforts on ESD by bringing together ongoing efforts on ESD and bringing and engaging multi-stakeholders within their country, whether it be from both education and sustainable development sectors. And bringing them together, putting them together would hopefully create synergies and promote ESD to the next level. And forest education will be an important component of this, as it relates to many countries across the world. And UNESCO stands ready to provide technical support to help these countries to prepare for these country initiatives. Next slide, please. So with this, I would like to now invite all of you to talk to your country counterparts in your own countries and encourage them to be part of this country initiative. And also globally on social media, do take part in our global campaign, Learn for Our Planet, and join our UNESCO LinkedIn group, which the address is posted on the screen as well as in the chat. This LinkedIn group will be a fora for everybody engaged in forest education to come together and discuss about concrete steps and possible ways of collaboration at global, regional, and national level. So we look forward to seeing you there and engaging in a conversation together. So with the last slide, please. I would like to leave you with some of the links and also contact details. Should you have further questions, we will be more than happy to discuss that separately through emails. And also you can find the relevant information on the websites provided. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to continued collaboration in the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Swan, for that great overview of the ESD roadmap. And we have seen that everybody has a role to play in implementing ESD in the next decade. And forest education has a very big role as it contributes to addressing several SDGs. If you look at forests and you look at things like climate, you look at all those several SDGs, you'll find that actually forests are linked, and ESD could be that golden thread that helps you to deliver a very effective and efficient education. And everybody has a space, be you a youth, be it a youth, an educator. How can you influence policy? How can you promote active citizenship? Thank you very much for that. So we'll now move to the next series of presentations, and I'll kindly request the speakers, please stick to 8 minutes each. And our next speaker is Ms. Sirpa Karkanen. She is the liaisons manager for the Finnish Forest Association. She develops and supports the cooperation between forest sector and schools in Finland. Welcome, Ms. Sirpa.
Thank you very much. And good day, good morning, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for the opportunity to give very concrete examples of networking and cooperation between forest sector and schools, and about partnership. Next one. First of all, I would like to point out that the framework that supports cooperation is very important, and it's quite well working in Finland now. First of all, we have the national curriculum that includes education about sustainable use of natural resources like forests. Forest ecosystem is very important in the curriculum, and biodiversity and climate change are also included in that. And the curriculum also encourages teachers to take contact with surrounding societies, as well NGOs, as enterprises, to work together in projects, to invite people for visits, and to make excursions, and to see how the forest sector is working with biodiversity and climate issues too. And secondly, we have the forest certification system called PEFC, and it has a criteria which encourages all partners to support children and young people in building up relationship with forest, and to support the education too. And third, corporates have social responsibilities. And for example, what they do, they give funding to organizations which work together with youngsters, or they arrange events or projects with schools. And it's part of their corporate social responsibility. And then we have very good networks. So we are all the time working together, not only organization only, but together. Next, please. And first, I emphasize that the cooperation from school's point of view is always welcome when it supports the curriculum. It's the first thing to understand. And now I have 3 examples of cooperation. The first one, Forest Days for Schools. Next one, Forest Quiz for the upper grades, upper school. And then also about the visits companies make to schools. The next one. And this is an example of Forest Days. And the goal is to tell about sustainable forestry. And there is a network of 20 actors of different organizations who are doing these Forest Days. And you can see that there are 11 standpoints. And the pupils come by buses to forest, and the forest companies are paying for they are paid by the companies, so there are no costs for schools at all. And the pupil, they walk from one standpoint to another standpoint, and there are different organizations taking care of different standpoints. You can see, for example, there's this first one, wood products, and there are the forest industry there, and carbon cycle and trees, it's our standpoint. Biodiversity is by WWF and so on. And there are hunters telling about game keeping, and of course recreation, everyone's rights, and it ends with bonfire. It's very important. But this is like a network, and all this is free for charge for the schools. And about 40 schools come during this week to forest and get this knowledge there. Next, please. And then another one, an example, it has been going on for 40 years now. It's the forest quiz. And it's also a question of partnership. So it's co-organized by biology and geography teachers. And we have a group called Forest Quiz Team, which is making the questions and taking care of the educational part. And it's all co-organized and sponsored by Finnish Forest Foundation, forest companies, and forest owners. Next one. And the questions are about half of the upper school take part in forest quiz, and the questions consider forest of all 4 angles of sustainability. This was this spring's school level competition, the example of that. The next one. And the final is a competition in forest. 50 best schools are invited. The winner and her or his teacher are invited to forest. And the questions again are made by Forest Quiz Team and also the sponsors. So they are with us in the field. Next one, please. And it also, it is visits and excursions to companies and research centers and universities as well. Next one. And the last example is school visit campaign for 8th grade. Now it has been running for 7 years actually, and it's co-organized by Forest Industries Association, their members, companies, and us, Finnish Forest Association. And there are trained ambassadors who visit the schools. They have already made materials, and what they take to school is a suitcase containing wood-based product samples and info cards about them. The next one. And so half of the upper schools actually take part in that in those visits too. And the last thing I want to say is that there should be a need for cooperation for all the partners, schools and companies and forest sector NGOs. And it has to be supported by the curriculum. As I said, it was my first thing. And these networks are important because they offer different aspects to forest and sustainable use of forest, and the role of forest in campaign against climate change. Yes, next one. Thank you. It was a very quick one, and I have still 1 minute left, but I have to leave after my presentations. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sirpa, for that excellent presentation that shows a very good cooperation between schools and the Finnish Forest Association that has different actors to include the private sector, forest companies, NGOs, and community linkages. And just to and the different events that you have put that are there that help to build awareness to the children, to the youth, and also build capacity. Thank you very much for your presentation. Since you have to leave, thank you so much for joining this session, and we look forward to learning more from you. I hope from this conference a network will be built, especially of educators around forest education and ESD. I think that would be great. Thank you very much. So we'll now move to the next presenter for this session. We have Mr. Pramod Kumar Sharma. He's the International Director of Education for the Foundation of Environmental Education. He oversees overall program development, administration, supervision, and evaluation of 3 programs, the Eco School program, the LEAF program, and the YRE program. Welcome, Mr. Pramod.
Thank you, Jipura. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Just wanted to confirm. So I will be focusing on learning about forests as one of the programs, and Sirpa is one of who presented before me, is one of the founding countries, Finland, that established the program around 21 years back. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So just give you a background, Foundation for Environmental Education is a 40-year-old organization. It's a member base established in 1981. We engage with around 20 million students through youth-based program, young reporters, eco schools, and learning about forest, and also run 2 other tourism-based program called Blue Flag and Green Key, which also has elements of forestry within them as part of the management of those sites. And Global Forest Fund is another initiative, which is a climate offset initiative where we pull together resources just to compensate for the emissions that are there because of our own operation. And one small campaign that we have been running for last 10 years called Little S in 15 countries has an outreach of 3 million students over the last 10 years. Thank you. Next slide, please. So if you look at the alignment, and in the opening presentation, we were discussing about what we are looking for, and Bernard also highlighted the key competencies. So LEAF as a program is supporting ecosystem restoration, which is, and we are aligning our activities for next 10 years based on that, and also ESD for 2030. So the program is basically looking at empowering. We have put children and teachers at the center of the program, and have given them a framework and an experiential learning experience, basically, which empowers them to take actions. And positive action is a important skill as part of what we also call handprint as part of our programs. Restoration is, so positive solutions are to be seen as a change, as an outcome of our education process. We are looking at a healthier environment for people as an outcome. So this is the incentive in terms of connecting the change or the improvement that we want with the people's health, which could be both physical and mental health, and then celebrating leadership, recognizing them, and giving them awards, rewards, or labels. And the focus is on giving them the experience that changes the behavior on sustainable consumption, and then also focusing on actions that I have highlighted earlier. We are also looking at researching through the key performance indicator. Gaia 2030 is our strategy for next 10 years, and is driving, as I will discuss further in next slides, our actions around the theme of biodiversity. And we are listening and learning all the time. We are learning from all the members and all our stakeholders, and improving the programs so that they remain relevant. As we know, the landscape of environmental challenges is changing fast. Next slide. So our strategic plan, Gaia 2030, is focusing on 3 broad areas, which has a strong link with forest, The first one, which has a direct link, is protecting global biodiversity with four sub goals, looking at rewilding and strengthening the existing and creating new forests, promoting sustainable management of coastal ecosystems, combating pollinator and insect loss. That is an important area that we have identified and has been also shared and suggested by experts around the world. And then the fourth one is raising awareness and support action to remove invasive and alien species, which I also basically in my personal capacity agree on, because that's one area which is of concern and has got little attention in our educational programs. And then reducing environmental pollution and empowering climate actions are two other broad areas that we'll be focusing in the next 10 years. Next slide, please. So learning about forest is an outdoor education program. So other two programs, Eco Schools and YRA, are focusing on young people, but on different aspects. And they together, all these three programs complement each and complete the education that we want. And LEAF uses nature as a classroom. So it's an outdoor education program that complements the Eco School program, which is formal education whole school, happening mostly in the school boundaries. Next slide. So the mission of the program is to inspire young people to take action, help them know their nature, their local biodiversity, and the life forms around them. Help them create agency, which is an important. It's not about just creating awareness, but help them to understand that what action they can take directly to restore biodiversity, but also indirectly through their consumption to influence global biodiversity loss. And then, which is now coming out very strongly in research, is enjoy the connection with nature, connection with, in terms of mental health. These are the four LEAF missions that drive the program. And ultimately, we are trying to bring children closer to forest to enjoy and understand the natural world and the important functions that it plays in our life. Next slide, please. So when we look at function of forest, we look at it from four perspectives, which are also perspectives or pillars of sustainable development. The first one is cultural, and every society has a value or a cultural knowledge or information based on which they take and interact with the forest and nature around them. So it's, recognizing them, strengthening that is one aspect. Recognizing, as many of the speakers have highlighted, the economic aspect of forest and how it is an important resource for livelihood and sustenance in many parts of the world. And then the social, the way we basically interact and use forests in variety of social context. And then ecological, we don't doubt about it, because it is where the life forms are rich biodiversity and ecosystem services like clean air, improved soil and quality is provided, which is also a strong link with economic aspects or the drivers for economy, which is under recognized, and we are trying to establish and create more appreciation for that. Next slide, please. So for us, forest education is a tool for ESD. So it provides the much needed physical activity, and especially in the screen-induced sedentary lifestyles. Some of the authors have also highlighted, or speakers, that to a large extent, what we are seeing is that children, especially in urban areas and many parts of the world, only have connection through screens to nature. So they recognize the global loss or endangered species or magnificent animals and plants, but really I don't have any connection to the biodiversity around them. So localizing that aspect is an important element. Independent decision making skills, which is critical thinking and all those aspects which are required, and which can be basically focusing on actions orientation based on the information and knowledge that we gain out of different subjects, experiences that we get in the school, and especially actions that we do as part of project based learning. I highlighted the other aspect of basically the health improvement, which is an important element of sustainable development, and also a social determinant, which is of the development of the society that we live in, and enhance social and emotional skills by working together, working with peers, and having empathy for all the life forms around us. Next slide, please. So Leaf learning objectives are based on, and I also would like to also connect it to the pillars that UNESCO also has highlighted, which are basically learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. And leaf learning objectives are strongly aligned to those pillars, and we focus on letting students enjoy the outdoors, give them experience to observe nature, understand the complex ecological web and where they are situated, not as masters of the nature, but as one of the component within that ecosystem. Students understand basic interplay of humans and nature.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Pramod, you need to
I will speed up,
yeah, time is up.
Yeah, just give me a minute. And then making decision and taking responsibility. Next slide, please. So we focus on a process because we understand that education, and especially when we are talking about forest education, it has to be place-based. So the focus is on looking the pedagogical cycle, which has 4 steps: looking and observing, exploring. Next slide, please. Analyzing and creating function or agency. Next slide, please. So these are the leaf indicators. I can share this with you if you are more interested to see that to what extent it is done in a quality way. And this also determines a leaf award that is given to a school. Next slide, please. But then there are challenges and barriers that we have also identified. Fear of unknown, health and security concerns are increasing, which is basically a big barrier in outdoor education. Lack of confidence among educators, especially school teachers, in taking children outside and explaining the wonders of nature. Then discourse that is a scouts thing. It's for certain group of children, not for all. That's another big mindset that we have to overcome, and limited resource and access in terms of green spaces and forests, and it's increasingly decreasing as we see around the world. Next, please. So we have a lot of resources. You can go to our website and find those stories, case stories, e-learning resources, campaigns, and activity guides. Next slide, please. So Gaia 2030 will be the next campaign, and look forward to the biodiversity campaign called, and we are aligning with the generation restoration campaign of UN, and it will be done throughout the year, having a lot of action activities and also lesson plan competition for teachers. Next slide, please. I mentioned about the Global Forest Fund. You can go to the website, and it's an important resource that we have created for people to compensate for their travel. And then the money is used for both education and plantation and strengthening forests around schools on 80 countries around the world. Next slide, please. And then also looking at nature and using this opportunity to educate about circular economy, which is a concept which has developed and based on learning from nature itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pramod, for that very interesting presentation from FEE and sharing all the very interesting programs that touch on biodiversity and forest education, linking to different SDGs. I've seen you touching on sustainable consumption and production and issues to do with pollution, climate action, and so forth. I think it's a very interesting program, and we will be looking forward to interactions from this group as we move forward. So allow me now to introduce our next speaker, who is Mr. Reita Furusawa. He is Associate Professor, the International ESD Center, a regional center for expertise, excellence, Chubu. He focuses on traditional knowledge and traditional knowledge-based ESD program in the Ise Mikawa Bay watershed. Welcome, Mr. Furusawa. Thank you. And let's try to keep to the 8 minutes.
Thank you very much for your introduction. My name is Reita Furusawa from Chubu University, and today I'm representing RC Chubu. My presentation will be a case report of the educational program for citizens, focusing on the traditional knowledge-based ESD and forest education in a bioregion. Next, please. This next slide, please. Can you hear? Bernard?
Bernard,
next slide,
please. Thank you.
Frozen. This is the background. Our activity started when United Nations Decade on ESD was launched in 2005, and our organization called ITTO was established in 2007. It is acknowledged by United Nations University as one of currently 179 regional centers of expertise on education for sustainable development. And our wrap-up meeting of the Decade of ESD was held in our region, Aichi Nagoya in Japan, in 2014. This is the old UNESCO World Conference on ESD. Next, please. And after the World Conference, UNESCO launched the GAP, Global Action Program on ESD. Then during the GAP, we, ITTO, conducted Traditional Knowledge ESD project. And very recently, we started a project called the Japanese Traditional Festival and the Biodiversity Project. And next, please. Japan is here, and the next. And Chubu region is in the central area of Japan. The biggest city is Nagoya City in Aichi Prefecture. Next, please. Then our target area is here. When we talk about our region, we use the concept of bioregion. So instead of using administrative boundaries, we use a natural boundary that is a watershed, as you can see, all the rivers flowing into Ise Mikawa Bay. Next, please. And this is the diagram shows our region. There are major rivers, river basins in the vertical lines, and local challenges in the horizontal lines from upstream to downstream of the river basins. The objectives of the bioregional ESD approach is to achieve holistic understandings of local challenges. Next, please. And before I introduce our program, I will briefly explain the philosophy that underlies our activities. And this is Aichi Nagoya Declaration adopted at the World Conference on ESD in 2014. And I just want to point out the significance of local and traditional knowledge in ESD was pointed out in this declaration. Next, please. And in 2015, Agenda 2030 was adopted, and we also working on SDGs. And we believe that there is a two-story structure of SDGs. In the first floor, it shows individual approach to SDGs, where each organization is tackling to solve individual SDG. But the significance of SDGs is a holistic approach, such as integrality, interrelationships of the goals, and also multi-stakeholders participated collaborations. Next, please. So we started, this is one of our ESD projects on traditional festivals. And as you can see, Float Festival in the left-hand side. Festival is one of Japanese traditional festivals. And we put this festival into the center of SDGs circle and looked at the interrelationships such as festivals and the community, festivals and energy, festival and gender, and so on. And now we focus on festivals and the environmental education, like SDGs 14 and 15. Next, please. Then we started a research on natural goods, which are used in the festivals, such as sacred plants, animals, or ritual foods. And there are the examples of festivals in our bioregion. You can see the reed in the river at the bottom of the picture. And this is from Tsunari River Festival. and this reed becomes a sacred plant during the festival. And also you can see the clams. This is a ritual food, which is called kushi asari, that is dried clams in a beach festival. Next, please. And this year we got a fund from Toyota Motor Corporation, and currently we are planning to conduct biodiversity conservation workshops with the local festival organizations. You can see the names of festivals and also natural goods in the festivals, and the plan of biodiversity conservation workshops. Next, please. So when we talk about the forest education, we have been conducted many forest ESD activities since there is a serious problem in Japanese forestry. About 40% of Japanese forests is an artificial, which means planted forest, which was formed in the 50s. But later on, planted trees were not used because Japan started importing cheap timbers from underdeveloped countries. As the result, the forests were abandoned. And these floats, you can see on the picture, is in Inuyama Festival, are made of trees called Japanese cypress. And in this workshop, we will collaborate with the Inuyama Festival Council and take children and families to forests to learn the issues and practicing thinning trees. So thinning trees is here. Can you see the picture here? It's yeah, this is the thinning tree. You have to cut the tree instead of planting the tree to protect the forest in Japan. Next, please. So key recommendations. Although our project is ongoing, my recommendations are as following. First is to treat the forest as part of bioregion. The concept of bioregion is useful in forest education for holistic understandings of local environmental challenges. The second is to adapt the biocultural diversity approach for forest education. Since the diversity of culture and nature is strongly interconnected, we cannot separate them. So mainstreaming the biocultural diversity education in forest education and ESD is one of the keys to achieve SDGs. The final point is traditional knowledge-based ESD for global dialogue on sustainable development, because traditional knowledge ESD approach encourages global dialogues and mutual understandings of different cultures and sharing sustainability challenges. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Furusawa, for that very interesting presentation that touches on traditional knowledge and ESD through the RCE in Chubu. I think it's very important for us to as we think about forest education and ESD, to remember about the culture, the traditional culture, and also the indigenous communities that live in those forests, and see how we can have programs designed in strengthening the importance of conserving forests, sustainable utilization, and applying the traditional and cultural aspects. Thank you very much, Mr. Furusawa. So we now have our final presenter for this session, and allow me to introduce Ms. Mika Mejiatan. She is the coordinator of the Asian Youth Biodiversity Program and the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, GIBIN, Transformative Education Action Force. Welcome, Ms. Mika, and glad to meet you again in a conference.
Thank you, Zipporah. It's also really nice to see you again. And today I come to everybody wearing my Global Youth Biodiversity hat, because this is what I'm sharing with you today is really global youth perspectives about transformative education and how that aligns with forest education and also with ESD for 2030. So, and in fact, what young people are thinking about is beyond 2030. We're thinking about a life in harmony with nature. So next slide, please. To provide some context, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network is exactly what it means. It's a global network of individuals and young people and organizations, youth-led organizations that are active on biodiversity. And another piece of this is that we are the coordination platform for young people in the Convention on Biological Diversity. So if you have heard about the Paris Agreement or the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, this Convention on Biological Diversity is the sister convention for biodiversity. And we are the official youth platform that coordinates how young people participate in the discussions. So one of our mandates is really to gather youth voices from around the world about biodiversity. And in this session, I will share with you what young people think about education and what we need in order to live in harmony with nature. This is talking about way beyond 2030. We're talking about our futures. So the next slide, please. We've been working on consultations globally around the world. We've done at least 35 consultations now, reaching over 120 countries, youth from over 120 countries. And we've all identified collectively that education, just as UNESCO has said, is a key leverage point for transformative change, because education shapes our values, shapes our behaviors, and it also transmits knowledge from one generation to another. And the next slide, please. But many young people they feel that current systems of education are not sufficient for us to live in harmony with nature by 2050 and beyond. And this is just one of the consultation sessions that we did online, where we asked young people, do you think current systems are sufficient? And many of them said no. And why do they feel that? Well, we are still living in a planetary crisis. We are still living beyond what the world can provide for us, what biodiversity can provide for us. And in order to be sustainable, young people have identified that transformative education is the key for that. So next slide, please. So we are calling for education that is truly transformative. And UNESCO has mentioned already at the beginning that the focus on ESD for 2030 is transformative action. But what does that really mean to young people? I'll explain that in a little bit more detail here. Next slide, please. Transformative education to us means diverse approaches and strategies for education and learning that fosters an active citizenry, people who are aware of our place in the web of life. This connects very much with forest education that all our speakers have said before, that we are aware about the relationship between humans and nature and the forests, and our role in society. Fully capable of stewarding society towards a sustainable, peaceful, and equitable future that's in harmony with nature. So let me break down some of these things into what it looks like so that we can understand it better. Next slide, please. Just some features of transformative education. These all came from young people around the world. These are their words, these are our words. First, we're looking at education that nurtures connectedness with nature, a kinship to nature. We're looking at education that is gender responsive. And what that means is that we take into account and we understand how gender comes into play. We are talking about education that integrates content on biodiversity, cultural diversity, because bio and cultural diversity are very interlinked. Sustainability, education, heritage, your identity, and social justice. We are looking at education that supports intergenerational transmission of indigenous and local knowledge. So many indigenous and local knowledge is being lost, but what an education that is necessary for sustainability will have to sustain that across the generations. We're looking at education that fosters sustainable, respectful, responsible, proactive, and critical societies. I've also heard from our previous speakers that critical thinking is a key part about forest education, so that young people can understand, can observe, and then question whether this is workable for our societies, whether it's sustainable. Then moving on, it needs to encompass education at all levels. So it's not just formal education, but also informal education and non-formal learning spaces. So yes, in your curriculum that you have in school, but also in your homes, in your communities, with youth-led NGOs and so on. It needs to be accessible. It shouldn't be just for certain populations. Another speaker also mentioned that people think it's a scout thing, but that's not the case. This education should be for everybody and inclusive of all kinds of diversity, diverse people, including neurodiversity, and that it celebrates this diversity, because ultimately it is about how diversity sustains life on Earth. So next slide, please. This is just a slide about that young people feel about how we can make transformative education a reality. And here are just some of the things that we think are necessary for this. First, it must be integrated in the formal education curricula, so that it's recognized and that every young person can go through that. So it aligns very well with the ESD's strategy of having it be part of the member states' national curriculum. We need to support and recognize the value of non-formal and informal education. And I'm very glad to hear a lot of examples from our speakers today. We need to ensure that education is rooted in our cultures and that it recognizes the value of indigenous and local knowledge and supports the respectful and self-determined transmission. We should not be prescribing how indigenous knowledge is to be transmitted, but that it should be self-determined. Education institutions must also support and engage their local communities so that education is localized in your context. For example, Furusawa said that in Japan, there are many forests that are planted from before. So that's different from another country. Like, for example, I am from Singapore, and in my country, we only have 1% of forest left from primary forest, but we do have a lot of secondary forest as well. So we need to localize education. We need to provide support and training for teachers on biodiversity related matters. And we need to support lifelong learning and reskilling towards sustainable transitions. We're talking about a transition from our current unsustainable ways to change our values, our thinking, societal systems. That doesn't change overnight. If you think about it, our current systems took thousands of years to develop. So in order to change that, it will take time, but we are running out of time because we are in a planetary crisis. So I also recognize that we are running out of time in the presentations. So Bernard, may I ask you to skip the next 5 slides to just to the end about more information. It's slide 14. Yes, right there. So for more information and perspectives, if you'd like to see our policy brief on transformative education, please do log on to the GYBN website /education, and you will be able to see it not just in English, but in Spanish and French. We're hoping that we can get it out in more languages, as we said, to celebrate the diversity of understanding information and education. And for a lot of the young people in the audience, Bernard, could you go 2 more slides down? Yes, this is a call from GYBN to all young people for how you can also advocate for transformative education, for forest education, for ESD. Talk to your decision makers, the people who can put this into your national curricula. Do awareness campaigns to raise awareness about this, about the importance and why young people believe in this, because it's for our future. Organize things with your fellow youth, and also lead by example. Then next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I think I meant the last slide. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I was able to share a little bit more about the big picture of what young people want to see for education for our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mika, for that excellent presentation. And I think participants have heard what the youth are calling for. They want transformative education, intergenerational dialogues. They want accessible education that is accessible and inclusive, that considers gender, and they have their call for action on curricular integration, teacher training, lifelong learning, ensuring culture is an underlying dimension. And they're also calling for an action amongst themselves, calling for more advocacy on these issues, and also themselves being role models. Thank you so much for that. So we're now going to move into the panel discussions. And the first panel discussions, I'll pose some questions to the presenters. And then after that, we will go now to the real plenary, whereby the participants now can be able to also ask questions. And we also have some comments on the chat box. So in order to manage time, the first question I'll pose, we'll need each presenter to respond in 1 minute. And I'll pose the first question to Mr. Pramod Sharma. In 1 minute, can you tell us, how can we better promote partnerships between schools and local communities for effective and efficient sustainable forestry efforts and programs?
I think we have to go back to the original purpose of education, which is to prepare for society that we need. And it has to be built as an objective for our education centers, as we have committed in Berlin Declaration to use ESD to redesign our societies. We are piloting many initiatives where schools are demonstration sites. And in my early career, working with 150 NGOs to strengthen the natural resource management among tribal communities, one of the key components I found was missing is that the school was not there. Young people were not there in their programs. They were targeting the elders and missing out young people who would be part of that group in 2 to 5 years. And also important is to bring in experts from the community to school. We look at formal education as only expertise, but then there is a lot of wisdom. Tap that wisdom, or what we call traditional knowledge or intergenerational knowledge among the elderly, from the elderly. And I have seen complete erosion of traditional knowledge in just one generation. We have to tap that, and we need to be sensitive about it. And this requires a framework-based education where we just give framework. We don't tell them what to teach and how to teach, but there's a framework which helps them to do a place-based adaptation and in different contexts. And then focus on all the elements, socio-cultural, economic, and environment, just not one aspect of the dependence or relationship with forest.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Pramod. Now, I'll pose the second question to Mr. Reita Furusawa. In 1 minute, could you please tell us how can organizations integrate forest education into ESD programs and perspectives, intergenerational dialogues, community planning, and decision-making processes?
Yes, I believe that the SDGs are highly variable for expanding the scope of forest education. So the reason is that, as I have shown, by placing forest education in center of the SDGs circle, 70 related topics can be addressed. And at the same time, I assume that the number of stakeholders involved in the forest education will increase simply like 17 times more. Then I'm currently working on an initiative to link environmental conservation groups with the festival organizers who are suffering from a lack of successors to their festivals. But without the SDGs, I don't think such an strange, outlandish initiative would have been understood by the local people or even Toyota company. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Placing forest education at the center of SDGs will address all the SDGs, and of course, through education for sustainable development. Now, one more question to the panelists, and this one I'll pose it to Ms. Mika. How can young people contribute to addressing forest issues and the biodiversity crisis, both at local and global levels?
Well, I think I've shared a little bit in my presentation as well, but really young people need to make sure that our voices are heard. So in 1 minute, my main message is that our voices are important, particularly because it's our future and it's our current situation that we are living through. And so we need to make our voices heard to the people that can make a change. And that would be the decision makers. And how we do that would be very different in each of your specific locations. So the best way to start is to join an organization that is already doing something and then learn from them how they are talking with companies, how they are talking with their local governments. Learn from them, how do they engage with other people, other stakeholders in your community. So that provides you a basis to know how is best to influence the people that can make a difference. So that's a very, very quick answer to your question.
Thank you very much, Mika. We have heard you. Make sure youth voices are heard and targeting policy makers. So we have 12 more minutes remaining for this session, and we'll now move into the plenary, and I'm going to request participants who have questions, maybe we'll allow you first to raise your hands. Then after that, we can also look at what is in the chat box. Just remember, we also have Ms. Joy Chediaka from the Youth UNESCO Climate Action Network, who is our rapporteur for today's program from Lagos State, Nigeria. So this is a question time. Participants, feel free to ask questions to the panelists. You can raise your hand. We'll be thank you very much. Andrea, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. I'm Indrila from India, and I have a query. I'm curious about this 2030 SDG, sustainability for education for sustainable development goals. Being a forestry graduate and master's, I feel that forestry is core of sustainability, and thinking in forestry helped me understand things in a more systematic way than my peers from other courses can. But how? Like in my country, we do not have school education which promotes forestry or sustainability. So the school children, when they grow up, do not have that systematic thought. How to bring that? And is there some certificate based or some certification being done by you for young students, young graduates like us, who can promote that these two schools? Or is there any training program or some kind of capacity development for us to be the educators in the field and start something or help in schools where there primarily no such education is present, and also in skill development based schools, I mean vocational education also? Is there something that you are providing us which we can embark on?
Thank you very much for that very important question. What some panelists would like to answer that? Somebody among the 5 speakers today?
So I will be happy to respond. I think the case is not that the information is not there about forest in the school education system. The information is there, but it is more about information, which is knowledge of facts and figures and the types of forest and all those things, but not about the concerns and what actions are needed and how, as consumer or citizens, we connect to those resources. That part, I think, is missing, and that also then requires a pedagogy like project-based learning or active learning and all those types of pedagogies, which is a concern or a challenge in many education system. And I'm coming from India, I know that's a big challenge when the teacher or the lecture method dominates, which then is all about transmission of knowledge or information or facts. So we have to basically look at the transformative processes that are required and train and capacity build teachers. The content is there, but then how it is delivered is the challenge, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. Anybody else would like to answer that question from the panelists? Yeah, so I would also like to add to you, Ms. Andrila. Of course, we have different, in India, I think also, just to talk from your perspective, there's lots of organizations that are running programs apart from government. For example, we have FEE, which has been represented here by Pramod. We have the Center for Environmental Education, and we also have WWF with the headquarters in Delhi, and they're in different states in India. And they have very vast environmental education programs, and it would be good if you can be able to connect with them. And I'm happy to also link you up with our colleagues in India. Thank you very much. Any other question? Yes, Mika, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd actually just like to respond to Oindrila's question. It's not a concrete response, but what I'm hearing is that you have all these skills and you have all of these features that we are talking about today, but how can you make use of that? How can you be part of the change, right? And I think what's difficult for us to pinpoint is that it's different. How change happens is different in every location. And so one way that I'm thinking of is perhaps if you can do a stakeholder map of your particular situation, like who you have connections with, who is influential in the process that you see when it comes to education, when it comes to, as a forestry graduate, the job landscape or things like that. Who has power, who has the influence, and where you come in to that. So with that analysis, you'll be able to then sort of see where is strategic for you, including your own context, and where is strategic for you to then try and make a change in that system. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. Anybody else would like to ask a question? I'm also scrolling through the chat box, and I can see a question there that says, is there algorithm or instruction for involving schools in forest education or learning primary school students about forestry? So I don't know if that is talking about an instruction or an algorithm, and I don't know whether it was specific to a presenter. Anybody would like to take that before we wind up?
I was going through that question and I'm just trying to understand what when we say algorithm and all those aspects, what do we mean? I share that LEAF has a 4-step process and most of the project-based learning approaches, and I see that that's the algorithm, which is basically tells the process of how to go about empowering children, or what we call also a transformative education, which has to start with exploring, discovering, thinking about what they have discovered in terms of challenges, and then doing that action within and practicing that and build that agency. And then I think one flaw that I see in most adults' mindset, and Vika will agree with me on that, is that we see children as future generation or future actors. Sorry, they're the current generation now, and they are acting now, and they will have to act now, and that's the important engagement that we need to have. We have to stop talking about that they are future, they are present, and and we have examples from around the world that the great change they are bringing about, and the way they are influencing their families and the communities and the societies. And some example like Greta are there who have been single-handedly responsible for awakening of the societies on issues. And there are thousands of examples which are not visible on Facebook or social media, but then there are within the communities. So algorithm is the way you do it, the way the transformation happens, and which is about getting involved and deep thinking and helping the children with those processes.
Thank you very much for that answer. I'm not seeing any more hands up, and I think we have only 4 minutes left. And I think this has been a very interesting discussion. First of all, seeing the entire, the whole framework for ESD, the roadmap from Ms. Won, and let us see how we can be able to play a role in this new decade through forest education. We've also seen how we can have a whole community approach to forest education with the example that we had from Finland through a forest association network that links up the private sector with the schools and the communities and so forth. And we've also seen how you can have real hands-on forest education in the field through the presentation from Mr. Pramod. And then we've also looked at how we can promote forest education, linking up with traditional knowledge, because forests have a lot of traditional information, and how we can ride on that to really strengthen forest education, looking at the traditional aspects. And of course, we've also seen the role of youth and the call for youth action. And some things that I've picked up towards the end, taking forward, there's need for expertise, so we need to build capacity. And ESD is a big tool for building capacity through the ESD methodologies, pedagogies, and through the different pillars, the different areas of intervention of ESD, be it advancing policy, capacity building, transforming environments, youth mobilization, and community action, and riding on traditional knowledge. We've been requested, we are also, another key takeaway is the promotion of traditional knowledge. And then a very important point that came up from Mr. Furusawa's presentation is that for us, even as in ESD, as we use education to deliver the SDGs, in forest education, if you put forest education at the center, you'll see that you're able to deliver the different SDGs, be it life and underwater, be it in oceans, for example, the mangrove forests, be it in climate action. When you talk about decent jobs, how do you link that up with how do you link up, for example, decent jobs with forest and looking at the issues of sustainable consumption, and also finally making sure the youth voices are heard and the youth being there at the front of policy engagement. So I want to really thank all the speakers for today. Thank you so much for the excellent presentations. And also thank you to all the participants for attending this session. It's been really engaging and very useful. And I hope we can be able to take these discussions forward as we move on. Thank you so much. So we'll be moving back to the main plenary. I think the sign for leaving the breakout room has come. Thank you so much.